We continue now at the top of Daf Kufya Dalet and Beis in Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 114b. On the previous summit, the Gemara had three surim that you cannot give to children. Number one, you can't feed them shkatzim. Number two, you can't feed them blood. And number three, you can't make them tamei, talking about the children of Kohanim. They can't become tamei mace. And so the Gemara says, why do you need all three? So the Gemara says, if we only had the case of the shkatzim, mishum di yisuran b'mashu, because there the yisur is even the smallest amount. Rashi over here says, b'mashu b'cha'adosha kitumasan. Just like their tumah is the size of a lentil, so too the yisur to eat them is at the size of a kadosha, the size of a lentil. Tosas over here says, perish b'kuntras yisuran b'cha'adosha v'lo duck. Tosas says Rashi was not exacting over here. Tevehed yamar b'me'ilah b'parakachim izbech t'shrotzim lokan aleim b'kezayis. The achilak sibu, that it's not a cha'adosha when it comes to shrotzim, it's actually a kazayis. It says the word achila. And so therefore Tosas gives his own explanation. Eliyesh lefarish di yisuran b'mashu deloka al nemola mishum dehave bria. Let's say you had a situation of a full bria, a full creature, no matter how small it is, the person is going to get malchus. That's what it means, that the isur is b'mashu by shkatzim. And the Gemara continues, Avol dam da'ad de'ikar revius, but when it comes to blood, where the shear is actually a revius, so emalos, I would say no, it's not the same thing, it's not as strict. V'yashmin and dam, and if I only had the case of dam, mishum de'ika kares, because by blood, eating blood is punished by kares, avol shrotzim emalo, but shrotzim I would say is not as strict, so therefore you need to write that as well. V'yashmin and hani tarti, and if I only had these two cases, the case of dam and the case of shrotzim, mishum de'yisuran shava bekol, because those are prohibited to everybody. It doesn't matter, kohanim, levim, yisraelim. Avol tumah emalo, but tumah, which is not something that applies to everybody, it only applies to kohanim, I wouldn't say we were as strict. V'yashmin and tumah, and if I only had the case by tumah, then I would say kohanim shani. On the contrary, kohanim are different, we're more strict with them. Mishum deriba ben mitzvahs yiseres, because there are extra mitzvahs. There are many mitzvahs by kohanim that don't exist by others. Avol hani emalo, but the other cases, when it comes to dam, when it comes to shrotzim, maybe we wouldn't be as strict. So tzricha, so that's why we need all three cases. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from our Mishnah. Shnei achin echad pikeach v'echad cheirish. The case was, let's say, you have two brothers. One is a pikeach and one is a deaf mute. Nisu and shtei achayos pichos, and they're married to two sisters, and the two sisters are healthy. Neither of them are chereshes. Neither of them are deaf mutes. So meis cheirish bal pikachas. So if the cheirish dies and he was the one married to the pikachas, mayasa pikech bal pikachas. So what should happen in terms of the yibam with the pikeach who's married to the pikachas? And the answer is teitze mishum achos. The answer is that in that case, she's exempt from Yibam and Chalitza, because it's a situation where she is the sister of his wife, because again, in the situation of the marriage between the Cheresh and the Pikachas, that was an inferior marriage to the marriage between the Pikach and the Pikachas, and therefore she's going to be exempt from Yibam and Chalitza. But let's say it be the other way around. Meis pikach bal pikachas. Let's say it's the pikach who dies, who's married to the pikachas, and the pikachas is now the widow. Mayasa cheresh bal pikachas. So what's going to be with the cheresh bal pikachas? So this presents a real problem over here, because his marriage is not really a full marriage, meaning the cheresh and the pikachas, and so therefore motzias ishto beget. He has to divorce his wife with a get because of the potential yibum he has with the widow. V'yeshes achav asur liolam. But on the other hand, the wife of his brother is also prohibited to him forever, because at the end of the day, he is married to her sister. He's married to the pikachas. And so the Gemara now asks, Amai motzias ishto beget. But why should it be that he has to divorce his wife? Why does he have to give his wife a get? Teisiv gabe, because she should be able to stay with him. Because katan ochel nevelasu. Because it's a situation where he's just no different than a minor that's eating non-kosher. In other words, if you don't need to separate a minor from non-kosher, so over here also, you shouldn't need to separate the cheresh, even if what he's doing is a violation of some sort. But if we said before that you don't need to separate a katan from aveira, so over here also. And so the Gemara answers very simply, Mishum Isura Dida. No, the reason over there why they have to be separated is because she is a pikachas. She is not considered like a katan, and therefore there is a prohibition for her, and that's why they need to be divorced. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, another proof from our Mishnah, Shnei achin pikchin. Let's say you have two brothers who are pikchin, nisu and shtei achayos, and they're married to two sisters. Achas pikachas v'achas chareshes. One of them is a pikachas, and one of them is a deaf mute. Meis pikach bal chareshes. If the pikach who was married to the chareshes dies, and so the chareshes is the widow, mayasa pikach bal pikachas. What's going to be with the pikach bal pikachas in terms of yibam ben chalitza? And the answer is simple again, teitze mishum achos isha. She's completely exempt from yibam and chalitza, because she's the sister of his wife, and again, it's her marriage that was the inferior one, so everything is fine. But what about the other way around? Meis pikach bal pikachas. Let's say the pikach who's married to the pikachas dies. So now the pikachas is the widow, and that was a full marriage. Mayasa pikach bal chareshes. What's going to be with the pikach who's married to the chareshes? Motzias ishto beget. He's going to have to divorce his wife with a get. And he'll have to do chalitza with the wife of his brother. Again, he can't have either of them. And so the Gemara now says, again, why does he have to divorce his wife with a get? Again, she should be able to stay by him, because katan ochel nevelos. Because again, it should be a situation of katan ochel nevelos, because she is a chareshes, and therefore if she's a chareshes, again, there's no violation for her, she's just like a katan. And to that, the Gemara answers along the same lines as before, Misham Isura Didei, no, there's a prohibition by him, because in this case, he is a pikeach. The case was, again, it's the pikeach bal chareshes, so because of the prohibition by him, and he is not considered a katan, that's why over there they have to separate. And the Gemara continues with another proof. Amar Rava says, Tashma, come in here. Another proof from the Mishnah. Shnei achin, echad cheresh ve'echad pikeach. Let's say you have a situation of two brothers. One is a cheresh and one is a pikeach. Nisuin l'shtei achayos, and they're married to two sisters. Achas pikachas ve'achas chareshes. One is a pikachas and one is a deaf mute. Meis cheresh bal chareshes. Now, if the deaf mute who's married to the deaf mute, if he dies, so now she is the widow, the chareshes is the widow. Mayasa pikach bal pikachas. What's going to be with the pikach who's married to the pikachas in terms of yibam and chalitza? And the answer is again, Teitze misham achos ishto. She's completely exempt because she is the sister of his wife. Again, she's the one this time coming from the inferior marriage. Meis pikeach bal pikachas. Now, if it's the other way around, if the pikeach who's married to the pikachas dies and the pikachas is the widow, mayasa cheresh bal chareshes. What's going to be with the cheresh who's married to the chareshes? Again, the Mishnah says, Motzias ishto beget. He has to divorce his wife with a get. V'yeshes achiv asur liolam, and the wife of his brother is asur to him forever. Again, he's in a situation where he can't be with either woman. And so the Gemara now says over here, you can't give the same answers you gave before. Here there's no Isser when it comes to her, and there's no Isser when it comes to him, because they're both deaf mutes, and they're both no different than a katan. The katani motzias eshto beget, and yet it says he has to divorce his wife with a get. In other words, apparently, when it comes to a katan who's eating the velos, you do have to separate that katan from the Isser, just like you have to separate them over here. And the Gemara says, no, that's not what's going on over here. Amar Rav Shemaya says, the reason why they separate over here is because if you don't separate them over here, there's going to be confusion, and people are going to think that you allowed a Yevama to marry out in the marketplace. Rashi over here says, Mishum gezeiras hataras Yevama l'shuk di'amrinan teisiv chareshes gabe cheresh. If you're going to say that the chareshes is allowed to stay married to the cheresh, so lo yadi inchi the time mishum katan ochel nevelasu, people are not going to realize that the reason they're staying married is because a katan who's eating nevelus, you don't have to stop him. V'savri, what they're really going to think is the kiddushin didad dachula lezeka to pikachas achosa, that their marriage was good enough to push off the whole yibum band of the pikachas, her sister. V'en boal achosa kukasa, they're going to think there is no problem here, that he's not having relations with the sister of his zakuka. They're going to think that's why they're staying married. And then you're going to think, people will therefore think that the sister is allowed to marry anyone, like any other case of achosisha that's patur from chalitza. In other words, people are going to think there's a genuine exemption over here from chalitza, and they're going to end up allowing a Yevam l'shuk. Hadron ala cheirish. This is the end of the 14th parak of Mesechet Yevamos. If you're enjoying these videos and this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And we will now begin the 15th parak of Mesechet Yevamos. And the Mishnah says, Ha'isha sheholcha hiu ba'ala l'medinas hayam. Let's say you have a situation where a wife and her husband, they travel l'medinas hayam, they travel far away. Shalom beino leveinav. The situation is that there was peace between him and her, between husband and wife. The shalom ba'olam, and also there was peace in the world. There's no war in the world. Uva v'yamra, and she comes and she says, Meis bali, that my husband died. So tinase, so we believe her, and she's allowed to get married to somebody else. Meis bali, if she says my husband died, and assuming she didn't have children, tesiyabim, so then she is allowed to do yibam, again on the basis of her word. And the Mishnah continues, Shalom beino leveina umilchama ba'olam. Let's say there's peace between him and her, between husband and wife, but there's war in the world. Or kitata beino leveina, or let's say there's fighting between him and her, v'shalom ba'olam, and there's peace in the world. Uvasa v'yamra meis bali, and then she comes and she says, my husband died, eino nem menes. In such a situation, the Mishnah says she is not believed. Rabbi Yehuda says, Liolam eino nem menes, she is never believed, elim kein basa bocha v'gadeh kruan, unless she comes crying with her clothing torn. Amru lo, and they said back to him, they said back to Rabbi Yehuda, achazu v'achazu, both in this case and in that, meaning it doesn't matter whether she's crying or not. Tinase, she is believed, and she's allowed to get married. And Rashi over here says, "Ha'isha v'shalom ba'olam she'ein shas chayrim detema b'didami me'omid liba." In other words, it's not a situation where you're going to say, well, she was just estimating, she was just guessing that maybe he died. Let's say in Pirish, Heimena chodesh achadash, and maybe the situation was he separated from her for a month or 2 months. V'adai hol v'lo chazer hargo listim. So she says to herself, look, from the fact that he hasn't returned, he was certainly killed by listim, he was killed by robbers. The hol v'lav shas chayrim ilo chazise demes, because since it is not a situation where there is disruption. In other words, if you're in a situation where there's peace between him and her, and there's peace in the world, so if she doesn't know for sure that he died, she's going to be too worried to say that he died, and then she's going to end up being wrong. Maybe he's going to come back after she already remarried, and that will ruin everything. That's what we say in Paraka Isha Rabba. And again, similarly, the Mishnah said, if there's an arguing between them, that's also a reason not to believe her, because you can say, since she hates him, rotza lesser atzma, so she wants to make herself prohibited on him. She doesn't really care about the consequences, and that's why she may not be telling the truth. And the Gemara says, Tana shalom beino leveina mishum dekaboy lemisni kitata beino leveina. The reason why the Tan of the Mishnah says in the beginning that there's a situation where there was peace between him and her, between husband and wife, is because the Mishnah wants to follow and say that in a situation where there were arguments between the husband and wife, that is a reason not to believe her. And similarly, Tana shalom ba'olam, the reason why the Tana starts out with a case where there's peace in the world, because we want to lead to the case where there's war in the world, where again, that is a reason not to believe what she is saying. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, "My taima de milchama." What's the reason why, if there's war in the world, we don't believe her when she says that her husband has died? Misham da'amra b'dadami. The reason is because really she is just guessing. She's just assuming that he has died, but it's not really that she saw that he died. Because salka daita b'cholhani deiktal hu palit. Because she says, do you really think all of the people that were killed in the war? Do you really think he, my husband, escaped? That's what she is thinking to herself, and that's why she doesn't really know that he died. She's just assuming it. Im timtza lomar kaven de shalom beino leveina. And the Gemara says further, let's say you're going to say that since there's a situation here where there's peace between him and her, where there's peace between the husband and wife, not trad de chazia. So you'll say, no, she's not going to assume he died. She wants to wait and see. Maybe he's going to actually come back. But the Gemara says, no, even in such a situation, zimnin and demachula begiro beromcha, there are cases where he might have been pierced by an arrow or by a spear. The savra vadai mace, and she thinks he for sure died. In other words, she thinks that she saw that he died. V'ika david samtori v'chay, but there are some people who they're able to make some kind of a medicine and they're able to survive. So in such a situation, again, she might say that he died when really he had not died. And Rashi over here says, bidadami me'omed liba. Again, bidadami means that she just says that she's guessing that this is the case. And even though she did not see that he died, Rashi says, like I explained before, the savra salka died b'cholhani diiktal hu polit bitmia, because she says, do you think that of all the people who died that he survived? That cannot be the case. And the Gemara continues, Sava Rava Lameima, Rava thought to say, Ravon Eno Kimilchama, that a famine is not like a war, and she's not going to just assume that he died in a famine if she does not know that for sure. The Lo Amra Bidadami, she's not just going to guess that her husband died in a famine. But Hadar Amar Rava, but then Rava retracted and he said, Ravon Hareo Kimilchama, famine is the same thing as war. She's going to guess in that situation as well. And why did Rava say this? Dahi da'asas lakame de Rava, because there was a woman who came before Rava. Amruleh, she said to him, Bali meis barav, my husband died in a famine. Amar lo, he said to her, Shapir avadit, it's good what you did. The shezaft nafshach, that you saved yourself. Salka daidach, devau pursa, denafafisa, the shavaktle, havachai, do you think with that little amount of flour that you left him, that he would have survived? In other words, Rava said to her, it's good that you left, he only had a little flour left, he would never have made it. And he was saying that in order to test her, to see if she would respond, that really her husband was still alive, but she had just assumed that after she left, he died. And that's exactly what happened. Amruleh, so she said back to him, she said back to Rava, I see the master also knows that in such a situation it's impossible to live. In other words, essentially she admitted that when she left, her husband was still alive, and she was just assuming that he had died. And the Gemara continues, Hadar Amar Rava, then Rava retracted and said further, Ravon Guriyah Milchama. Actually, when it comes to a famine, it's even worse than war. It's even more assumed that the woman hasn't seen anything. De'ilu Milchama, because whereas by war, Ki Amra Meis Bali b'Milchama Hu D'lo Mahemna. It's only if she says that my husband died in the battle, in the war, then she's not believed. Ha-Meis Al Mitasu Mahemna. But let's say there's a situation of war in the world, and she says, I saw that my husband died on his bed, she actually would be believed. Ve'ilu Gabe Ravon, whereas when it comes comes to a famine situation, ad amra mesu kavartiv, she has to actually say he died and I buried him. We have to have 100% proof from her words that he actually died and that she saw that he died. And Rashi over here says, mesu kavartiv, again, by a situation of famine, she has to actually say that she buried him. Because when it comes to war, really there are ways where she can imagine that he survived. Maybe he ran away and he was saved, and therefore we have more reason to believe her in that situation. Avol beraba, when it comes to famine, she's thinking to herself, there's absolutely no way he could have lived, and therefore there's more chance that she's just guessing that he died. And the Gemara continues, Mapolas hareu kimilchama, let's say you have a situation of collapsing buildings, that's also considered the same as war. The amra b'dadami, because she's just saying it because she's assuming that he died in the collapse. Shiluach nechashim v'akravim, let's say you have a situation where there are snakes and scorpions attacking. Harehein kimilchama, that's also like war. The amra b'dadami, because again, she's just saying it as an assumption that he died from the attack. Devra, what about when it comes to plague? So amri lo hareu kimilchama v'amri lo eno kimilchama. Some people say it is like war, and some people say it's not like war. Amri lo hareu kimilchama, some say it is like war. The amri b'dadami, because again, they say that she's just going to assume that he died in the plague. V'amri lo eno kimilchama, but others say it's not like war. The samchi adamri inshi, because one can rely on what people say. Shev shenin havamosna, that there were 7 years there was a plague. V'inish below shani lo azal, and nobody died before their time. In other words, it's possible to survive situations of plagues, and therefore she's not just going to say he died when she does not know that for sure. And the Gemara continues, they had the following question, let's say she's the one that tells us there's a war in that part of the world where they were. In other words, without her testimony, we would not have even known that there was a war. So what's the halach in such a situation? Do we say that she has no reason to lie? She could have just lied and said there was no war. The fact that she tells us there's a war and she tells us that he died is a reason to believe her. And we'll continue this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Tesvav Amud Aleph.